Namaste and in-law catch, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as always, I will draw attention back to the Namaste and in-law catch. These are two ancient phrases, one from the Sanskrit, one from the Mayan. The Sanskrit Namaste means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you, and in-law catch means I am another you. So imagine what that kind of perspective can do for you when you explore the possibilities within it. And I encourage you to do so. Just put it to the test and see what happens. All right. So this episode, we're going to welcome Frank Bolaji Irawo. And I hope I pronounced that right. I didn't ask him, but I think it's probably fairly close. He's a book author. His book is Dream, Manifest Your Path to Joy, Peace, and Contentment, which is on Amazon. He's got a new one coming out too, and we'll talk about that a bit as well. He's a featured contributor on Biz Catalyst 360, which is where we met initially. He's been an IT systems administrator and consultant for a number of years before launching into his own coaching realm. And I found one of the things that he said in his profile to be strikingly interesting, and that's staring financial bankruptcy in the face. I undertook a journey of self-discovery, reevaluation of my values, reconnecting to my purpose. I started studying mindfulness, psychology, and neuroscience to discover how to create persistent transformation without having to constantly change things out there. So with that, Frank, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Zen. After that introduction, hey.
Well,
yeah, indeed.
You're an intriguing guy, and thanks for your willingness to come and chat.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
So I'm curious as to, and with all my guests, we kind of explore, the relevance of that beginning development of understanding, or at least getting inklings of this interconnection that we have to everything else. And was there a time in your life that you kind of had that initially, and you may have stuck with it, or you may have, like many of us, kind of left it behind for a while and then rediscovered it later? How was that experience? What was it like for you?
Well, for me, it was, I started my spiritual journey kind of along the religious track of Christianity. So, interesting enough, my father is Muslim, my mother is Christian, but we got raised more along the Christian pathway, so to say. I went to a Roman Catholic school. There wasn't that much in the spiritual element to that, because it was more liturgy, it was more process, it was more just,
sure,
yeah, those kind of things.
Did you ever get the rap on the knuckles from the nuns?
Yeah, yeah, that and some. But they always look like they drank lemonade somehow. But anyway,
yeah.
So it was when I started growing older, and I remember my grandmother, she was a very spiritual person, and she used to pray for us a lot, and she'd sit up all night praying and things like that. And I remember my mother calling us together as children when my grandmother died to say, well, she used to hold us up in prayer, now it's our turn because she's not there to do it for us, so we're going to have to start paying attention to our spiritual destiny, so to say. Mm-hmm. At that point, we started getting active in Christianity and stuff like that. So then got introduced to the idea and the concept of spiritual gifts and things like that, prophecy, dreams, speaking in tongues, and all those kind of things. So ultimately, from that point of view, for me, then my spiritual framework was framed purely based on the Bible. And if it's not in the Bible, I'm not interested. That was basically where I was.
Not uncommon in today's world still.
Yeah. So that, and then what happened was, from that point of view, I then got introduced to a variation in Christianity that was inclusive. So that's where things began to shift. And that was framed as a grace movement, if you like. And the concept there was God loves absolutely everybody.
Right.
And there is nobody that is beyond God's love. And
kind of a Unitarian perspective.
Yeah. God accepts you on the basis of just being
you,
your performance, exactly, rather than your performance. So So that kind of was a transition. But what really opened me up to a bigger and a wider definition of spirituality, and to look, and that's why I made reference to mindfulness and the likes of it, was when I went through a period in my life where I was trying so hard to be financially independent, and somehow I ended up, like I said, almost bankrupt. And if we get opportunity, we can explore how that transpired. But nonetheless, my point is that made me pay attention to say, okay, everything I've believed and everything I've performed so far, I must be missing something if this is where I end up. What am I missing? And
that's a great question that many of us don't ask.
Yeah. I had to ask, because because for me, I wasn't just Christian. I was someone who was considered a Bible study teacher. I was considered a teacher if you look at the Christian gifts. So I was the person to take the Bible, expand it, and help people understand what it's saying. So if I studied that much Bible and blah, 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 and my experience is ending up here, I'm missing something. What is it? So that's what led me to that search. And one of the things, I read a book by Michael Singer called The Untethered Soul. And the premise was very simple, but everything is simple and profound, but earth shifting when it's what you need at that very moment.
Right. And it's funny how simple and profound things truly are once you start asking the questions, right?
Yeah. And the question and the thing that he put on the table was, have you ever considered that you are not your mind? And it's kind of like, oh, what? No.
Right. Oh man, that's just, no, that can't be.
And then
I'm a thinking being. There's nothing beyond my mind, right?
And what it reminds me of, this story about, a couple of fish going in water, and there's this older fish talking to this two younger fish saying, oh, the water's pretty warm today, isn't it? And kind of like, he goes past them, they're going along, and then one of them turns to the other one to say, what water? What's he talking about? And it's that idea that when you're immersed in something, and it seems everybody around you is immersed in it, you don't recognize it.
Right.
Until you have the grace. And I think my period of difficulty and trial made me open to explore. And like you say, that question I was asking opened the door for me to see, oh, wait a minute, I was now open to that. Because before I would have said, oh, this is all Eastern stuff. We Christians don't touch this Eastern stuff, which is ironic, because actually Christianity in theory comes from the East. But anyway.
Very true. That's very true. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's not based here in the Western world. But anyway, those things kind of miss us when we're looking at.
No, it's kind of, it's kind of middle of the road in the Middle East, right?
Yeah, Middle East.
Which is kind of interesting how can you be, is it Middle East, Middle West? Is there a Middle West?
Well, who knows?
Right. Anyway, so in that, which is a fascinating discovery, I've got to admit, and for those who do have it, it's a wonderful journey that is often, I like to use the term, excruciatingly fun, because it is that process of recognizing that something's missing, and so there's a void there that could be, as you experienced. Let's look at that a little bit in your experience, and how or where you were at in life, what you were engaged in, and how it was offering up this something's missing.
Right. So the premise of it all was, I was always into personal development. So I always liked this idea of, let's find ways in which we can look after ourselves financially, so then we can do whatever we want. That was the Kool-Aid I was on at the time. And and it was triggered by a guy called Robert Kiyosaki in his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And the whole idea was, oh, well, don't just work for money, make money work for you. So, which was a great idea. And I thought, well, I love personal development. I want to be a full-time coach. So what I want to do is become financially independent, so I can open a shop somewhere and say, look, I'm a full-time coach. All pop in, please. Well, at least that's how I thought it was going to transpire. And kind of what happened was that everything I tried to do in order to get to this point of financial independence, Other people might very well be doing well with it, but I would find a way to screw it up, basically. So if it's foreign exchange trading, for example, I'd find a way to not follow the rules. I'll find a way to try and prove that I can do it in a better way, even though I've only just learned about it. There was almost like a subconscious sabotage going on with all the things I was trying. And I was always open to the next person who says, look, this is the thing that's really going to make it happen. If you look, I made millions from this. If you can just follow my system, you will make millions as well. And I just kept spending money buying all these programs and finding a way to mess it all up until I looked at the bank balance and thought, oh shit, this is not good.
Right.
If I
you were focused on the outer.
Yeah, right. That was my point.
The doing.
Yeah. That was the point. And that is the big discovery, to be honest with you, was I realized that my model for success was an outside in model rather than an inside out model. Mm-hmm. That was my big revelation. Well, yeah. I'm trying to go out there to make myself successful.
Right.
And judging if I'm successful by virtue of all the things that are out there.
Yeah, well, it brings up the old adage or admonition, if you will, of the guy at the core of how you were brought up, and that is to make the without as the within.
Mm. Yeah.
That's such a simple statement, right? And yet we tend to not really understand it, or to use Heinemann's term, to grok its importance.
Yeah. And what's interesting as well is that even all the Christian scriptures that I grew on were pointing to this, but I just didn't see it. Because Christ would say the kingdom of God is in you. It's kind of like it's not out there, it's in there. He was saying you have no need that any man teach you because the Spirit is in you. So there were pointers to this. Right. But it's just sometimes until you have a lived experience of what you're trying to do that's not working, like you're not ready to see that yet. Sure. And that is something that really, it really got me thinking. And then, like I say, when I read about You're Not Your Mind, and then I started putting that together to say, okay, are there things my mind is telling me that I don't need to believe? Are there things that my mind is creating that I don't need to be involved in?
I saw a meme one time that says, don't believe everything you think.
That would be a good summation of it, really. Yeah. Because a lot of the stress and because that's the other big thing for me, is this whole idea of us suffering emotionally because of all the things we've believed that the mind is making up about things.
Okay, so let's explore that. That's a great observation. And so what do you think is the reticence that we have of being able to bring that out, to talk about it, to explore it, to feel safe enough to do so?
I think because, like I say, it's a bit like the fish swimming in water. I think people just mind boggle at the idea that, what do you mean you're not your mind? And the irony here is it's the same mind that's trying to filter this communication. So it's like, how do you step out of it enough to see it? Because it's there. Because one of the things that the Michael Singer actually said in his book that was interesting was say, okay, don't you find it curious, though, that your mind is taking two separate options? It's saying, oh, it's this. And then in the next second, it's saying, oh, but it's that. It's like, okay, what's the chances of that being the case? And also, why do you need the commentary about what you can already sense and see? By your mind running constant commentary like a roommate that can't shut up. But actually it's observing. So he talked about this object-subject idea, that, okay, who is observing what the mind is doing? Because if you're able to tell what the mind is doing, then you are not the mind, because object-subject, you can see it and you can observe what it's doing. Therefore, you must be apart from it to be able to see it, or you're at least able to transcend it. So that was another
and
thing.
Have choice.
Yeah.
In it. Right? Because the observer, then, if you're observing something, then you're aware, and it gives you the opportunity as to your choice of how to engage what you're observing or not.
Indeed. Yeah.
Right? So I find it really interesting that after 40 some odd years of studying research, I find this document that was written in 1964, or actually published in 1964. And in it, it offers a simple statement of, we live half inside and half outside.
Hmm.
Right? The
Say a
within
bit
and the
more about
without. And we don't seem to really understand that. For some reason, we fear the unknown of the inner. And that's probably the most present when we're able to just acknowledge and, like you say, you know, step back and observe what's happening. So in that observation, for me, I had similar background, raised in a Christian environment, went into college, started and had this explosion into the awareness of cosmic consciousness, for lack of a better, and that the understanding that we are all cosmic consciousness condensed into form, just unaware. So it also gave this opportunity to explore other things. Being a kind of a biblical scholar, I then read the Quran, Upanishads, Rig Vedas, Bhagavad Gita, the Urantia book, all kinds of things that explored the same topic from different perspectives. And in that, I got the urge to go look up the word Satan and see where it truly originated from. I was in college at the time, so I went down to the university library and referred to these two massive dictionaries, right? The 2-volume sets that are huge. And the first reference was from the Greek thetan, Thetan, meaning thinker. And as soon as I read that, it was like a major clunk in the dots connecting inside of me of how it isn't an enemy. That's us. We are thinkers by nature. So we're that satanic being that we are attempting to judge and criticize and make responsible for all the stuff that we do that's out of alignment with the inner.
Yeah.
So that kind of took me to a new level of releasing that, okay, this isn't this is a projected being of, you know, in the outer world of something that really we need to look at inside.
Yeah, and I'd rather push that to say all of our experience is pretty much like that, really.
Yeah.
In essence, because even what we call God, when we think God, we're looking for a guy with beards, and we're looking for
an anthropomorphic being, right?
Yeah. Which in essence, I mean, the nature of spirit is formless by nature, and it's only for us to have some frame of reference that it ends up taking on any kind of form for us to observe.
Right.
It's purest form.
In that truest form, then the cosmic consciousness condensed when it's fully manifest is what we call Christ consciousness or Bodhisattva. It's that internal connection that makes everything visible, and our ability to move within that at escalating levels, depending on how willing we are to engage.
Yeah.
And possibly, and maybe this is, you know, do you feel like that? For me, I came to the notion of a perfected form, fit, and function in the world, and that really the nature of being human is twofold: to love and be loved, ultimately, and that when those things are fulfilled, that we can find our you know, we always ask about, do I have a purpose? Right. And so that would indicate that deep within us, we know we do somehow. We just don't understand how to arrive at that point, right? Or have the questions that are necessary to get us there.
Yeah, and so was one of the things I wanted to say about that, just to go back to a point you made a lot earlier, was this whole thing about seeing. And in essence, we don't actually see anything out there. All our seeing is internal, even though it's projected out there. So there's nothing, all of the seeing faculties that we have all are within, and then they're projected out.
And manifest as our perceptions.
Yeah, indeed. And then the other point I was going to make, I'm a bit blurry, actually. Let me fix that quickly.
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah.
My end.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm fine. Yeah. It's come on there now.
Stop
Yeah.
looking at yourself. But
But
isn't that the ultimate, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have to look at ourselves, truly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that segue. That's very good. That's
Opportunity. Yeah, I couldn't
yeah,
pass it
yeah,
up,
great,
right?
great. The other point I was going to make is this whole idea of the connectedness of all things. So there is only one essence in all of the universe, and that essence is showing up in different forms.
Mhm.
So going back to the point you were making about faith and Satan, and some people might balk at this, but ultimately, if that is true, then it has to come from the same essence.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
if there
ultimately,
is one,
wanting to
we
vilify.
talk about the oneness of creation. Well, if
Yeah.
there's just one, then
Yeah.
how does that present?
Yeah, and it has its job, it has its role to do, even if it's just waking us up or helping us see what we're not seeing, or helping us discover the trueness and the awesomeness of our own nature.
Now let's look at it from a practical standpoint, because we talk about this stuff and we're pretty fluent at it as we've connected and recognize that in each other. And yet there's this other mindset that would listen to us and think, well, these guys are just talking about all these kinds of metaphysical principles that aren't really applicable in the practical day-to-day living. And it's really unfortunate that that perception still exists, and yet it does. So how do you see this? And let's look at the current situation, right? We've got a global institutionalized fear of each other that's been happening over the last couple of years, and all this pressure from major media and the narrative to adhere to the recommended actions that others outside of us are saying we need to take. How do you see it? And we're facing that now as a global community, and there's different places and groups of people who are beginning to question that, and question it so openly that they're in the streets protesting about it. So how could this be the silver lining of some unforeseen event that took place that we want to say happened because of certain things, right? And yet may have had something else in store for us as a silver lining or a potential one? How do you see that, or do you see that?
Right. Okay. So here's my premise when it comes to anything whatsoever, is that the universe is unfolding for us, not to us. So in that line, my question would always be, what is the situation I'm in? Even if I wouldn't have chosen it for myself, what does it offer me as a gift for me to be able to grow, develop, and experience life more fully? That would be my approach. So looking at it,
Excellent question.
Yeah. And looking at it that way, then the idea then is, okay, because one thing I've heard where I work as well, there's a lot of uncertainty and people moving on and things like that. Some people end up in victim mode of saying, this has happened to me and it's not fair and this and that. But the question really there is, where is my power in this? What can
where's your agency in that?
Yeah, what's your agency? That's it, exactly. So the question then is, what did I not see before that I can now see, that I can do something about? And very often that means is that it's like a wake-up call. You're being woken up to say you've been daydreaming through life, and the foundations you've built are not strong enough to handle this kind of situation. Therefore, there's an opportunity to build something different that can handle that. So it's kind of looking at
the transition, it seems, from competition in the last century to now collaboration, because we're all in it together now.
Yeah, that's a beautiful framing. And I think going back to what you were saying is, how does this understanding then inform that? Is when you understand that we are all one, then you ask the question, how can we serve each other so that we all rise? Rather than what can I take from you to make me better? So this zero-sum game kind of looking at things.
The rising tide philosophy.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Right. But ultimately, also, one of the big things that's come up for me, and you kind of follow this out in the book, is that the idea that the universe has not come to serve us, because the universe has predated us. Therefore, we have been invited to participate in the unfolding of the universe. And the beauty of that is that if we all come from the same essence, then that is the essence. If we allow it to guide us and if we participate in it, it will coordinate us in a way. It will bring us together in a way where we are serving each other for the good of all and not trying to take away in order to make one better.
And it's amazing how that philosophy is reflected almost ubiquitously in those who are exploring from all kinds of different realms, from industry, education, law, politics, all those kinds of things. I'm reminded of a book called Biocosm. It was written by a guy named John Gardner, I think, who's a lawyer. And in it, he talks about how the universe replicates itself in each of us. And that then that universal thread, if you will, that each of us have, then becomes this tapestry as we begin to observe and participate and question how we can participate better in it. And like you say, you know, we realize that we're missing something. Like, what are we missing? Science is now showing that we're inextricably connected. We're 99% space. So that means there's a lot of flow happening that we aren't aware of in that emptiness of space, but it really isn't emptiness. Some people are calling it dark matter. Maybe it's those shadows, right, that we're having to deal with now, and looking at ourselves and what we've been willing to accept as truth without questioning it, when the matter is we need to question it in order for it to be revealed.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Indeed. Yeah. And it's the dropping away of the filters to see what has always been there.
Right.
Because we're not creating anything new here. We're uncovering what has always been when we're ready to see what that is.
Now, isn't that congruent with the term apocalypse? Right? Because apocalypse means unveiling knowledge.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it doesn't mean
That is
catastrophic, you know, world event or something like that. It simply means uncovering knowledge.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So what is the basis for knowledge? Right? It's kind of a Zen thing. It's what is. Well, what is? Right? How do we determine what is? And it depends on the frame of and the lenses that we have as to how we see it.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Yeah, that is beautiful. I love that idea of the unveiling, the seeing.
Well, how did you understanding that, and I see that as a reflection of your work and of my work and others' work. Well, what are the practical things that you've been able to see? And let's go back into the realm that you've been in, the IT world, right? Because we're electronic, just the same, you know, there's the same light pulses going through us as are going through the glass tubes, right? When we consider that everything's light or frequency. So how do you see that kind of reflection or in the work that you're doing in integrating systems as well as the people in them?
Yeah. So the work I do, because I don't do the technical elements. I work with projects and deliver projects. So it's the people element that I tend to deal with more. And what I'm finding is that helping people to develop a sense of agency that is not victim based. So it's helping people see that there is what's happening out there, and there's how they're reacting and interrelating to those things happening out there.
Right.
And give them the agency to be able to step behind mind and recognize that they, in their internal core, is love and they are okay. And therefore, if they're experiencing anything out there as less than okay, it's not the stuff out there that's the issue. Right. It's how they're relating to it. Because there is the possibility to stand in that place and be able to objectively look at something and recognize that it is the mind that is creating the drama.
Right, right. Well, how the heck do you talk about love in the workplace, right? Because people are so resistant to even mentioning that word in a workplace, right?
Yeah,
Of being love. Well, what kind of questions, understanding that from your perspective, I get. How does that transfer into applicable articulation when you're working with groups of people to get them to a greater understanding without infringing on that love word?
right. Okay. So what I found to be the issue, and it's very interesting, we're talking about this in February where we're approaching Valentine's Day and the rest of it.
Right.
I think part of the issue is that obviously the word love has been so co-opted into different areas and used in certain ways. One of the biggest problems, barriers to love, is what we call romantic love, because of the lack of basis that it has, and the impingement on emotion rather than something deeper that is connected at a much deeper level, which is not just based on little acts here and there that people can use to manipulate other people, but something that's felt in here that recognizes it in you and then calls it out in someone else. And it's the removing of the filter and being able to see someone as they truly are. Now, that would require them having the permission and having a safe space to do it. And the only way I've found to do it is to mirror it first, to help people see. So before I work with anybody, generally speaking, we would have had some sort of connection. And my connection to them would be to create a space where I help them see that I'm only in this for their good. But being in this for their good may mean I might have to challenge them on something they don't want to see or look at. But that is still love.
Well, and that's the critical feature that I see, that when questions are asked, they're generally perceived as a threat, right? Or have been, because frankly, most of us don't like being questioned, because it forces us to look in, to really take a maybe not a deep, but at least a cursory view of where we're at with it. And that can be confrontational because we may not necessarily know. We might have a belief system that we think is applicable, but when those questions come up and that constrictive sensation happens because, oh my gosh, now I'm being questioned, how do I respond? Right.
Yeah. And a lot of that is, it can be with the skill of the person holding the space.
Sure.
And being able to communicate an energy, because there's so much you can communicate with words, but there's a power and an energy behind the sincerity and genuineness with which you hold.
85% of our communication is nonverbal.
Exactly. But I also like to put this on the table. I don't believe that I can hold that kind of space if I hadn't been through what I went through.
Absolutely. And I don't think any of us can. We can surmise what it might be like, but it is the experience, it's the direct experience of it that anchors the authenticity that we can then share through the compassion.
Yeah, and the empathy to recognize, because I was very judgmental, like I said to you, in my previous incarnation of how I held Christianity, I was very judgmental, and I just figured if people had problems because they couldn't get their shit together, that's all it was. By the time I'd experienced something myself, I recognized, no, it's nothing to do with that, and any of that stuff can happen to anybody at any time. And I just opened up my heart to be able to hold people, saying we're in this together, and this, your story is my story, almost in a way.
And so a leopard can change its spots.
Yeah. Well, spots are an illusion of the mind anyway.
Well, yeah, everything's kind of spotty if you.
I conveniently missed
temporary
all
and transitory. So in the development of that, and I think what you're saying is absolutely true. You have to step into that role model. And that doesn't mean that your growth stops. That means that actually you're challenged even more to be in that place, not only because you're aware that it needs to happen, but because it's your choice to do so.
Yeah, there's a saying that says actually that you, generally speaking, you get the clients you need for you to grow.
Right. And and the flip side of that is listen to the words coming out of your mouth because they're for you.
Yeah. That's another part of it. Yeah, that's another part of it. And I've had those experiences where I've said something to someone and then gone away and thought, I think I could use, use that myself.
So have there been moments where you've heard your father's words come out of your mouth?
When you use father, frame that for me, just so.
Okay, the male figure that raised you. Right?
Okay.
Because for me, I remember a conversation I was having with my daughter at 15 that my father's words came out of my mouth, and I recognized them, and I even said something to her in that moment.
Right.
Oh man, I never thought I'd hear Dad's words coming out of my mouth, right? But here they are, and so there was some value in that.
Yeah, indeed. And that's why I asked for the qualification, because for me personally, I didn't have a great relationship with my father. And part of what was missing was exactly what you're calling out, that sense of mentoring.
Mm-hmm.
That's because by the time I was born here in the UK, and then we moved back to Nigeria. And then by the time we got back to Nigeria, he kind of developed a new lifestyle that wasn't based around the immediate family. It was kind of more extra social kind of lifestyle. So as a result, he became missing in action effective when it came to raising me as a father. So, and which in a way affected my ability to perform that role. But I made a choice when I
Because you didn't have an example.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm still unraveling that as we speak. But what I'm fortunate to have had happen was I did make a decision when I started having children that actually what I'm going to do is be present. Now, I may not have all the skills or the tools, but I will be present. And to me, that's made a big difference in how my children have been able to grow, because you just show up with your heart willing to do what you know to do. Right. That's what you can do. And that's been a great experience.
That's what my father did for me. He wasn't my biological father. I was orphaned. And adopted early, and it just so happened I was adopted on their wedding anniversary.
Interesting.
On their 7th, so it was easy for me to keep track of their anniversary that way, right? It's kind of a dual celebration, and yet the advantage, I mean, because of the adoption, and of course I didn't know it initially until my sister came home 4.5 years later, and so then they decided to tell me. And, the question of unconditional love was never there, right? And yet, once I found out the questions of, okay, who are my biologicals? And because of attending Sunday school already at that age, my question went to, do I have a father and mother in heaven? Can I talk to them? Kind of like Jesus was talking about, right? So he says everything he could do, we could do more. So is that communication line open? And a few months later, it actually did open. There was a voice that I heard one night waiting for my father to come home from the store. And it appeared initially as a, hey, you, and startled me. But, it was like, okay, I answered a hey, you, right? Because I heard it. It was to me. It didn't call me by name. It just said, hey, you. And I heard it. And I spun around and asked my mother if she heard the voice too, because it was that loud. I knew she should have heard it, right? She didn't. So then I had the awareness of, oh, it must have come from within. Now, as a 4.5-year-old, who the heck understands that fully? But the awareness of hearing it was irrefutable. Right. And yet there was this unknown factor that I had to work with in order to establish that communication flow, which I was able to do over time just by standing in front of windows at night and projecting that, hey, you out, and waiting there for it to come back. Interesting thing is it didn't return until I was completely silent and vulnerable. Fearless. So I learned that before I was 5. Now, was I able to carry that through the rest of life? Not hardly. Right. And it wasn't until I got much older when I realized that fearless factor was what opens the door to everything else.
Right.
That as I'm saying that, I'm sure that your wheels were turning, you were reflecting on it in your own life. And how did that, or what kind of generative response did that bring?
So for me, I think we were talking actually before we click record on this, was this, for me, I don't hear an audible voice, but I certainly do hear a prompt or a direction or something that kind of just gives me that confidence, say, yeah, go there, or that is right, or that kind of makes sense, or just things come up in here that I just go with it. And it took a while to learn to trust that, to learn that
it's so nebulous, you know, and so out of nowhere, and so subtle.
That is the word. That is the word. Because again, when you grow up in an environment where people are going, yeah, I hear the voice of God and this, that, and the other, you're kind of expecting it to be in a certain way, for it to be validated as being divinely inspired. But ultimately, I then recognize that people pick up these signals differently in their own way. The important thing is, what are you doing with it when you get it? And it's the opportunity to be able to do things and trust. And one of the things I had to learn was not to be attached to the outcome. Because then what the mind gets involved and starts saying, oh, what if they think you're stupid? Or what if they think you're this? Well, and if you get stuck in all the what ifs, you will not.
And there starts the projections. Right. And they go all kinds of different directions and never manifest.
So it's kind of just follow through and let it be what it is. And if it comes back, it comes back. If it doesn't, it's not your problem. Just do what that is calling you to. Just be true to that.
So let's go back and let's go back into the practical realms of the workaday life. Right? And how does that show up with you and observing others in process of that? Is there an obvious sign or signals or patterns that you see that then you become aware need some slight adjustments so you can step in and nudge them a little bit, or is it more demonstrable to you?
So I've got two principles that I operate by when I'm at work. One is to love the people first as people before expecting anything of them as fellow co-workers. So that's always my first starting point. I want you to know I care about you as a person. If you never do anything for me again, if we never do anything together again. So that's the foundation I like to hold.
Right.
And what that allows,
you come at them with open arms rather than a hook.
Basically. And then once I establish that, on top of that, I have seen then that there's nothing that I can't put on the table that they won't come to and say, okay, I know that comes from a place of love. So even if it's a challenge or if it's a whatever, they know it's coming from a place of love. And then they can interact and engage, and we can learn together what needs to be different for things to be better going forward. So that's one. The second thing for me as well in my day-to-day work is this idea of, again, going back to what I was saying earlier about trusting the direction. So very often I'll be given directions 6 months in advance to say, start making these kind of changes. And really, if you were to look at it mentally, it doesn't make sense making those changes there. But I've learned not to question that. And what happened was, actually, I was told, okay, begin to divest these responsibilities now. And I was thinking, why am I doing that now? But I've still got, but 6 months down the line, things got announced, things started happening. And it made all the sense in the world that, okay, it was in preparation for the change that was to come that I had no way of knowing in my own natural mind. But because I trusted what I was led to do, I actually had set up perfectly that environment to be able to cope and deal with what was coming.
And there's a business philosophy too, that you create your replacements. Right? As you're moving onward, should you choose to do so, that you have to create your replacement because there's a gap that needs to be filled when you leave. And so, you know, the delegation, the distribution of labor, so to speak, right? There's that shift. And I have this sense that we can see patterns innately. We just may not be completely aware of it at the moment. And that's how the future evolves, right?
Mm.
We begin to connect the dots within those patterns into constructions that, or constructs that work more effectively together, in a
Mm.
sense, being more harmonious, right? There's this convergence toward a goal where the ego becomes we go. Doesn't discount the ego, because it's a necessary part of our being. And there's all
Yeah, we all need personal agency.
oh, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And it's nothing to destroy, which many self-development programs attempt to do, but it's not the ego that you're destroying. It's your misplaced agency.
Right. Yeah. And I love you brought that to the table, actually, because what I find is when I'm trying to help people see beyond mind, I find the next thing they want to do is hate the mind and fight the mind and do everything. And I think like that doesn't work. That kind of that's counterproductive. The
And
mind is there.
counterintuitive too,
Yeah,
but yet it seems to be a natural part of the process.
yeah. So it's like the mind is just genuinely confused because it can't tell what's a real danger from an imagined one. And the mind is good as an agent for getting things done. It's just not good as a master. Problem is the mind tends to think it's the master. And if you let it be master, that's where the problem starts and the suffering begins.
Then there's also this understanding now from brain studies, right, where the gamma zone, the athlete, this was found first in athletes, where it didn't matter whether when they were hooked up to the machine, right, didn't matter whether they were physically doing or imagining they were.
Yeah.
The same area of the brain lights up regardless.
Definitely. Yeah.
So that would indicate, like you're saying, that the outer doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's how we create that inner vision of perhaps direction and purpose, right? And when you're in the workplace, when you're in organizations, community development, manufacturing, distribution, you know, the bottlenecks that come up to the efficacy of the flow are those personal, I don't necessarily want to call them issues because they're ishme's. They're not an issue. It's the three fingers coming back at you, right? And so so those come up, and they can be constrictive, and the effective manager, leader, supervisor can recognize these kinds of things when they are choosing that path for self-development as well. Unfortunately, we haven't made that a consistent effort or opportunity in organizational development.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is that, and I really don't like using this phraseology, but we have to own it. I think the way the Western world is set up, almost set up for an industrial kind of agent kind of thing, where we educate people to follow processes, and we
absolutely, and that's the way it was set up.
Cookie cutter everything, and we try and separate and create false dichotomies. This is your personal life, this is your work life. You know, that doesn't exist. It's the same core of the person that's showing up. And if their work life, if their home life is messed up, guess what? It's going to show up at work. Right. Or they're going to be hiding at work from what's happening at their work. And they're only creating a pressure container that's going to blow. And sometimes it'll blow at the workplace. It won't blow at home. So I think, going back to what you're saying, I think if we start kind of merging those things together and start recognizing that there is a whole at play here, and the core of that whole actually comes from the formless to form. And therefore, if you're seeing things in the realm of form, if you want to address it at root, you have to go from what intention is it coming from? What understanding is it coming from? What paradigm is it coming from? Because if those are misaligned, you could do all the work you like, it's going to still come out the way it's coming out. Because if you see everybody as separate and there's a zero-sum game, and if he loses, I win, and if I win, he loses, that's a paradigm that's not going to grow us all together in a collaborative framework.
Right, right. I ran into a guy years ago, and I love the one phrase that I heard him say that has stuck with me, and that is, what we do anywhere, we do everywhere. So those patterns you're talking about, we may not recognize them at home, but we do recognize them at work, right? And then as you begin to look at, I agree, we're a holistic system. We have a holistic life. It's not separate pieces. However, we try to categorize or compartmentalize them. Those walls are still connected, and they form a honeycomb, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
And we're unable, and when and this is one of the things that I found on the internal journeys at one point, where this geometry takes shape inside, and the visuals of it was like a honeycomb, right? Where you could choose, and even with the hexagonal configuration, right? So the inner kind of spills out into nature in ways that we can then learn how to observe, and then comes the whole story about the biomimicry that's in place right now, and the trending that we're looking at. How can we reflect nature? How can we learn from nature? Because it's got everything we need when we ask it questions, rather than think that we have dominion over it.
Right. That was the point I was making earlier about that. If we get the perspective right and the relationship right, life flows in a completely different way, and we're not butting up against stuff, because we're recognizing, okay, we may not understand it intellectually, but this is the flow that in retrospect, when we look at it, we then come to recognize, oh, I see what was happening here. This was all for the beauty of the whole, even though it might have looked, what's your phrase again? Excruciatingly fun?
Excruciatingly fun. Yeah. And we have to admit, it is that.
Yeah.
And it's our own argument with ourselves.
Yeah.
That caused that. One of the things that, wonderful man, his name's Kai Alex D. It was the original WOFAT on Hawaii 50 years ago, and he had doctorate in theology. He was a Taoist. He had he was a rector for a Taoist temple here in or Taoist sanctuary here in Tempe. But he says to me one day, in our way, it's either desirable or undesirable, and we can sense that. We can sense that from a gut level, which kind of falls into another ancient philosophy of indigenous realms, where it's the first brain. It's where we connect to reality. And science is now showing that our gut has the sufficient neurocircuitry or neurosensors in it to do so.
That's why I would say follow your gut, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it makes so much, it's like, duh. We've heard this for a long time. We've heard about intuition. We've heard about gut feelings, and yet we second guess everything. And we go with what's up here instead. So, and that's called the third brain, where the gut's the first brain. So we process things from the head down, and we shove the crap into our body and wonder why it's diseased.
That's another conversation for another day.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a lot of awareness around that tonight now.
Oh, absolutely. And the stinking thinking, right? Yeah. And that's kind of what we're talking about, is when we see things as separate or as disconnected in any way, if we're experiencing it, everything's connected. We just can't see it as such, because that's not where we're viewing it from. Yeah.
There's only one essence in all of the universe. It's just showing up in different ways.
Sure.
For some purposes, yeah.
Yeah, we used to call it living in spirit. Now it's called living in quantum entanglement with a unified being.
I like that. I like that. Another phrase I like from the Bible is it says Christ is all in all. It's kind of that kind of, the essence is in all.
Right. And we get caught up in the word rather than the understanding.
Yeah, because it's pointing. Words are inadequate to communicate the true essence of anything.
Right, because it comes from a direct experience.
Yeah, because if I speak it, by the moment I speak it, by the time it gets to you, it's corrupted, because you're going to have your frame and filter on it.
What about, I don't know what I'm thinking until it comes out of my mouth. Right? I've heard that used. I made me pause, and it's like, because there are those moments when you are open and vulnerable and available as a let's say, a transmission device,
Mm.
right? Because the flow is there, and whatever needs to happen, you're available for it to come out your mouth. Right?
Indeed, indeed. And I think that's what we're here for personally, is how I see it, is that we're here to give form to that which the whole wants to do, to build itself, nourish itself, yeah, support itself.
So how do you see this evolving coming out of COVID, and what do you see as evidence that this is actually taking place? Because I think the more that we can observe and reflect that, the greater opportunity it gives to others to do so.
I think first I need to say that people will obviously come at this from different places depending on what they're ready to see. But what I've certainly seen is people are a lot more open to asking questions, for sure. And the things that people have always taken for granted, especially the permanence of their situation or the permanence of things being a certain way, has now been thoroughly challenged, so that people now understand that anything can change at any time. So they're beginning to question, what's really important to me? If my life were to end very soon because of this, that, or the other, what would I regret not having done? So they're starting to look. That's why now it's recorded. A lot of people are changing jobs and moving around, because now they're thinking, well, stuck at this job for a reason. That reason no longer holds, because things could change very quickly, and then it doesn't matter. So what would really make me fulfilled as a person? I'm going to go and do that, or I'm going to go and seek that. So I think definitely it's woken people up to not sleepwalking through life potentially, and also begin to evaluate what's important to them. It's also shined a lot of light on health, people recognizing the need to have maybe a better, more buoyant immune system, and be more careful about, okay, what would it take for that to happen for them? So those are some of the observations I've had, and people are a lot more open to these kind of conversations as well.
Thank you for that. It mirrors the results of what I had said to my wife at the beginning of our lockdown here in America. And what I said to her was, I really hope this obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration gets people to turn inward, because that's the only place they can go now. It's only them, right? Especially the single folks, they're cooped up with themselves, right? Are they going to obsess on the media narrative, or are they going to realize, wait a minute, I need to just kind of be with myself and examine my life, like you were saying, right? This is that trend of asking more questions, being more present, figuring out, what do I really need in my life that makes me feel fulfilled, as opposed to just being able to pay the bills.
Yeah, and it's beautiful you say that, because now that you were talking, I began to reflect. Actually, a very important part of my journey was this idea of learning to be comfortable with being just with me. Because what I hadn't recognized before then was that there was a lot of distraction techniques or distraction. So it's like always be watching something, or always be fiddling with something, or always be in this task or that. No ability to actually just sit with myself and not feel like I'm boring myself by being with myself.
Right.
So that and really the way the universe has helped me with that was to kind of give me a period of what seemed to be insomnia. So it's like can't sleep, but ultimately actually what that opened the space for is, in those moments when it felt like I was trying to sleep but couldn't sleep, I learned to go inward. I learned to get comfortable with seeing what I was looking at and saying, well, okay, that's me, that's there. What is that telling me? What's that saying to me? And over time, that's just built now, where I'm quite happy I could be lying there for 2-3 hours, and it's like, where's that time gone? Right. Because I'm just creating things that I want in my mind. I'm just playing around with things. I'm reflecting on things and allowing things to come to me and stuff like that. So it is something that people would either press more into numbing or press more into getting comfortable with.
What you described to me just now was the process of meditation, right? Of getting quiet, observing your distractions, and kind of having the opportunity to analyze
Mm.
them. This is how the mind is used as a tool rather than a master.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And in that process, and this is the essence of meditation, is to get you to be still and observe your life from that place. So when you're quiet, then that doesn't mean you're going to shut off, because your mind still operates, and you just become more attuned to watching the opportunities for distraction.
Yeah.
Your thoughts that are flowing by, and it gives you the opportunity to kind of examine those and say, okay, now what about those? Are they real? Are they imagined? What can I do about it? What can't I do about it? How much control do I really have of my own reality? And then you come to, oh, it's how I think about it.
Yeah. And the idea of not being attached to or believe in everything just because it's there.
Well, you mentioned outcomes and not being attached to outcomes earlier. And that doesn't mean, people see that, well, that means you can't be attached to whatever your strategy, your planning, or your goals or objectives or anything. No, that's not what that means. By doing so, you actually raise the bar, right? Because you can still have high expectations of outcome. That doesn't mean you're going to be tied to the specific
of how it comes to pass. Yeah,
right.
It's the ability to create the space to have fun, to play, and play as big as you want to play, not being attached to, because
it's got to look this way.
Yeah, exactly. Because then the mind latches on that and then starts beating you over the head with that, and starts distracting you with that, because, but it's not looking the way I thought it would look, or whatever. And I think if you're aligned anyway, I think you begin to recognize that you are tuning into the frequency that's already at play.
Absolutely.
And what that does is that if that's what's coming to you from that frequency, that this is how big the playing field is, then that's exciting, because you're saying, wow, this thing is really going to blow. And I'm going to be involved in this fun that's going to happen as a result. All I need to do is be in tune to know what makes sense to do next.
Now, from a personal perspective, and maybe you've experienced this too, and I'll ask you outright if you have, right? So for me, when I went into light as a teenager, it had this iridescent, effervescent, high-pitched sensation that was just amazing. And I often, when that process that you're talking about, the play and the work and the collaboration and all of that, there's this, you called it a frequency. There's a sense that it moves up, right? And and I will ask, when you're in that space, what's that sensation like? Is it a feeling? Is it a hearing? Is it a combination of those things and more? How do you experience it, or how would you identify it for you, that others who have a similar frequency to you might see it or sense it?
So I'm glad you asked the question, because I think this moment in itself is a perfect example of that, because there's that flow just here, like a warm glow, warm feeling that just travels down that way and then reaches out to the limbs. And it just, to me, it just comes across as, yeah, this is what you're meant to be doing right now. This is the space where there's and it also signals to me there's a flow. So it's not just it's like a flow, even if the flow is me producing something, writing something, or talking to somebody. There's an opening of an energy, and there's a flow, and it's almost got a circuitry about it that's coming back. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely.
And
you describe it very well. I have my own ways of describing it, and I always love to ask the question of, what's your experience of this same thing? Because we all have that different perspective that then comes together as a collective when we're in that space, and the more we can empower that through those that we're engaging, right? And for me, it's happened with production control in the aerospace industry, and 2,700 people in the plant that I had to deal with from time to time, to organizing and running events that had 50 volunteers and several 100,000 patrons. And then it advanced to working with building road and bridge construction teams, stakeholder teams, to facilitate partnering sessions, which focus on this, no ego without we go thing, where you come together with the goal, and I call it jobarchy, right? Where the job's the boss and everybody wins. And you create that flow towards it. And then that also applies in my transformational coaching, right? Where I can individuate that and help the person learn to ask the questions of themselves, or ask them to, give them the prompts to do so, and create their better connections and the flow in their own lives. And the results are completely observational. I mean, some of my the construction projects actually got Marvin M. Black Awards, which are the highest award in the construction industry.
Wow, that's fantastic.
These are multi-million-dollar, huge projects. So just being able, and nobody knows that I did that at the beginning, right? I'm just performing a function to bring everybody on, literally on the same page, because I haven't signed their charter, the goals and objectives document, and I talk about that. So I use what many would seem as metaphysical principles, but I talk about them in very practical and pragmatic ways, because they just make sense when you hear them with that articulation.
Yeah, and it's going back to, like you say, the whole idea that if we go back to first principles of what's the essence and the core behind it, then we build on that. What are the practical outtakes of that? Absolutely.
So on the framework or the offering side of things, of what you can impart to others as far as maybe the practical things, or some of the simpler things that they may be able to start exploring, perceiving, asking questions about for themselves. What would you suggest those might be for now, and with what we're experiencing in the world?
Right. So I think really, and again, it's a reason why I wrote the book Dream, which is a book of poetry.
And I found it fascinating that, your book was Dream, and my business I've had for 34 years now is called Be the Dream.
Yeah, we connected off of that, didn't we?
Yeah. Synchronicity, connection, right? That's what it's about.
Yeah, and the thing behind it it's not incidental, that it's actually a framework. So the D is for discovery, is to discover, where am I now? So what is gone on here? Am I really in the essence and the fullness of the kind of life I signed up for? So it's kind of becoming aware of where you are now. And then the R is about recovery. So it's about, okay, what from the excruciating fun and what we've just been through that was uncomfortable, that wasn't what I would have chosen, is going to be useful for me going forward. What can I learn? How can I look at it differently, to a place where actually I begin to see the gold in it? That is what that is about. Then the envisioning is about, okay, what do I have as gifts? What do I have as passions? What do I have as the things that light me up, that I can use and offer as something that would add value to other people? And how can I take that and use it to serve others? And how in that service can I as well be rewarded? So that's, and then action. A is for action, to say, what do I know to do now that I can do? And when I know better, I can change and then do better. It's the idea behind that is not to get stuck in perfectionism and things like that, or being afraid, and also not to overlook any small action you take, because ultimately every action, when you do it consistently, builds up to something that you look back and recognize what difference that's made. Then M is manifestation. And that, to me, is where I get you with what I call the punchline of the book. And the punchline of the book is, I know I've told you that you're doing all this stuff, but actually now that we've gone this far, I'm going to tell you that you're here to participate in what the universe has called you for. And now what you have to do is trust what's there, connect with that, flow through that. And there's something in there called flow, where you enter into the bliss of what is there for you now, where there's people talk about, if you love what you do, you never have to do a day of work in your life, that kind of thing. And that is the manifestation piece.
That's really cool. So what I heard you saying in all of that was, what you seek is seeking you.
That is exactly, I couldn't have put it better. What you're seeking is seeking you. And if you would allow me, I'll just read one piece from the book. Is that okay?
Sure.
Right. This one is called The Mythical Beast. Searching for the mythical beast. Without it, I'm told I can't be complete. With all others, I must compete to find that which has been missing of me. Untold harm incurred in its pursuit. Banks emptied, souls vanquished. Once their relationships laid to waste. No rest for the soul that yearns to be filled. Countless people line well-worn paths. Some crawl, some walk, while others fly. United in the seemingly never-ending quest, bent on finding and taming this elusive beast. Come what may, no matter the cost, the promise of utopia fuels the drive. This many people just can't be wrong, all hell bent in service of filling the void. Each step I take seems to bring me close, till right before my eyes it seems to mutate. Perchance the description given crafted to mislead. I dare not quit, failure, the antithesis of what I seek. Some days I arise feeling like this could be the one. Catch up with the beast that fits the bill. But the promised euphoria fails to persist. Like the great Houdini, it eludes my grip. Surrendered to my fate, it never to find. Taming that mythical beast was never mine. Returning home in despair only to find the beast was always here and I was it.
And hence the Thetan in each of us. Right? That was beautiful. That's how it works, right? You're moving through seeking what's seeking you.
Mm.
And that we're the only one that gets in the way.
Indeed.
Right. That was super. Frank, I have really appreciated this conversation. It was wonderful. We've kind of come upon the semi-end time, right? We're, I never put any specifics on it because I just pay attention to the flow and yeah. the advantages of doing so and creating the conversations. And I really appreciate your energy, your drive, your perspective, your observational capacity, and the way that you reflect and articulate. I have the sense that this was going to be a great opportunity for our viewers as well. So I thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I mean, the two times that we've actually sat down together, there's been such a beautiful flow of energy and between us, and I've just known that there's something aligned there, and I'm glad that we got to spend this time together. And like I say, I hope your viewers get value from it. And I'd just like to say that the book as well is supporting 5 charities. So anything they do to obtain a copy will be helping charities across the universe.
And I'll have the links in the descriptions as well. So super. And yeah, we exampled the ability to broach some very sensitive subjects and provide a foundation from which to spring from in our empathic and generative conversation. Apocalyptic in its own way.
I love that. I really, like I said, I'd never heard that before. It's brilliant. I love it.
Yeah, it's the Latin description, or the Latin definition of the word. So it's good to know where words come from so that we can have clarity in our understanding, right?
Indeed.
All right, speaking of, namaste and in la catch. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and I'll see you next time.
Uh,